World War I. It was this colossal, world-shattering conflict that basically drew the map of the world we live in today. But how on earth did it happen? What were the key moments that changed everything? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down the whole sprawling, complicated history of the Great War into one clear 5-minute overview. So, here's how we're going to do it. We'll start by looking at the incredibly tense situation in Europe before the war. Then, we'll watch how the dominoes started to fall, leading to this massive global stalemate. After that, we'll dive into the brutal turning points of 1917, and finally, we'll see how entire empires collapsed, giving birth to a brand new world. All right, so picture this. It's 1914. The big powers in Europe, they're not exactly friends. They're more like rivals, and they've split themselves into two enormous competing military alliances. And let me tell you, they are deeply suspicious of each other. The whole continent was, and this is the classic analogy for a reason, a powder keg just waiting for a match.
On one side, you had the Triple Entente, that's France, Great Britain, and Russia. And what really brought them together was a shared fear of Germany's incredible and rapidly growing power. Then, on the other side, you had the Triple Alliance. That was Germany, who was terrified of being surrounded by enemies, its kind of shaky ally, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy. So you've got these two massive armed camps just staring each other down. You could feel the tension in the air.
All this simmering tension, it really just needed one single event to make it all boil over. And that event finally came in the summer of 1914, in a city that, frankly, most people back then had never even heard of.
And here it is, the spark, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was next in line to the throne of Austria-Hungary. He was killed by a young Slavic nationalist. Immediately, Austria-Hungary pointed the finger at its rival, Serbia, accusing them of being behind the whole thing. And they saw this as the perfect chance to settle an old score. And this is where things just spiral out of control. It's a chain reaction. Austria-Hungary gives Serbia this impossible list of demands. Serbia, of course, rejects it. So Austria declares war. Russia, who sees itself as Serbia's big brother protector, starts mobilizing its army. Germany, Austria's ally, then declares war on Russia. Now, Germany is terrified of a war on two fronts, against Russia and its ally France. So they launch their master plan, the Schlieffen Plan. It was this massive invasion through neutral Belgium, designed to knock France out of the war, immediately. But invading Belgium? That was the last straw for Great Britain. They declared war on Germany, and just like that, within a few weeks, the entire continent was on fire. You know, everyone thought this war would be over by Christmas. They couldn't have been more wrong. Germany's big plan for a quick victory completely failed. The French and British armies, against all odds, held their ground at the Battle of the Marne, right outside Paris. The German advance was stopped cold, and the war of movement just died. It was replaced by something new, and something absolutely horrible. So what did they do? Both sides dug in. Literally, they dug into the earth, creating these vast networks of trenches to get some cover from the terrifying power of modern machine guns and artillery. And this is how trench warfare was born, this brutal, miserable system where millions of soldiers would live, fight, and die. And the scale of this is just mind-boggling. We're not talking about a few ditches. We're talking about an unbroken line of trenches and fortifications that stretched for 350 miles, all the way from the English Channel down to the Swiss border. It was a scar across the face of Europe. And for almost 4 years, that line would barely move an inch. And this wasn't just a European problem for long. At sea, Britain blockaded Germany to try and starve them out. Germany responded with a terrifying new weapon, the U-boat, the submarine. Fighting also broke out all over the world, in colonies in Africa and Asia, and new countries started jumping in, like the Ottoman Empire and Japan, turning this thing into a true world war. Okay, so by the middle of the war, everyone's just stuck in this bloody, muddy stalemate. The new strategy, if you can even call it that, became one of attrition. It was a horrifyingly simple idea. Just try to kill more of their soldiers than they can kill of yours. This brutal logic, plus two massive global events, would completely define the turning point of the war in 1917. And this quote right here, from a German general, it tells you everything you need to know about this new kind of warfare. The German plan for the Battle of Verdun wasn't to capture the city. Their goal was, in their own words, to bleed France white, to just force the French army into a meat grinder and destroy it through pure, relentless casualties. So, the Allies responded with their own gigantic offensive, the Battle of the Saale. And the result was an unimaginable slaughter.
On the very first day, the British Army had 57,000 casualties. It is still the single deadliest day in the history of the British military.
And after 5 months of this hell, the Battle of the Somme ended with over 1 million casualties on both sides combined. And what did they gain for that price? Just a few miles of muddy, shell-blasted wasteland. The war of attrition was literally consuming an entire generation of young men. Then 1917 happens, and 2 absolute game-changers hit the board. In the East, Russia, crippled by casualties and food shortages, just collapses into revolution. The Bolsheviks seize power, and they pull Russia right out of the war. Huge news for Germany, right? But at the exact same time, Germany's decision to start sinking any ship it wanted to, including American ones, and a secret telegram trying to get Mexico to attack the U.S., finally pushed America over the edge. The U.S. declared war, bringing its massive industrial power and millions of fresh troops to the Allies.
So, with Russia out of the picture, Germany knew it had one last, very narrow window of opportunity. They had to win the war on the Western Front before the full power of the American army could arrive. It was one final, desperate, all-or-nothing gamble in the spring of 1918.
Germany's massive spring offensive actually made huge gains at first, but they couldn't land the knockout blow. By summer, their army was just exhausted. Then the Allies, now reinforced with all these fresh American troops, launched a massive counterattack. The Battle of Amiens on August 8th just shattered the German lines and their morale. Their own top general called it the Black Day of the German army. They knew the game was up.
And after that, the collapse was incredibly fast. One by one, Germany's allies just fell apart. Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, all gone. Finally, with revolution breaking out back home in Germany, the Kaiser abdicated and fled. And on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, Germany signed the armistice. The guns finally fell silent.
The peace that came after, the famous Treaty of Versailles, was, well, it was harsh. Germany was forced to take all the blame for the war, pay crippling reparations, and basically dismantle its military. The map of Europe was totally redrawn, tearing up old empires and creating new nations.
And the human cost of it all is just staggering to even think about. Nearly 10 million soldiers killed, more than 20 million wounded. On top of that, an estimated 7 million civilians were dead too. It was a level of death and destruction that the world had simply never seen before.
And that's the key thing to remember. The war didn't just kill people, it killed an entire world order. 4 massive, centuries-old empires, the Russian, the Austro-Hungarian, the German, and the Ottoman, were just swept away, gone forever. And they left this huge power vacuum and a very, very unstable new world. You know, at the time, people called it the war to end all wars. But all that unresolved anger, especially from the incredibly harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, it left behind this deep legacy of bitterness. So you have to ask yourself, did the Great War really bring lasting peace? Or did it just sow the seeds for an even more destructive war just 20 years down the road? That's the question the 20th century would have